G'day, Mike Allerton from Aussie Mike's Bees with another update on the Varroa Response. Today is the 20th of October and today we had an email with good news for recreational beekeepers. We can move our hives again. So more on that shortly. And also, back on the 12th of December, there's a Senate hearing into biosecurity. Mostly that hearing was all about the Varroa mite incursion and responses. It was also meant to include foot and mouth, but that hardly got a mention. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Let's get started. So first of all, on to that email. So this is the content. Now, right up the very top there in fine print, it says, registered recreational beekeepers in the general, as in the blue zone, is now able to move honeybees and beehives via a hive movement declaration. Now, before this was only available to commercial beekeepers, so this is a big step. Up until now, recreational beekeepers were not allowed to move their hives. The only possibility was when we caught a swarm and we could relocate it from the point of capture to the final destination with no steps in between. And we had to do an alcohol wash. And I've been doing several of those at the beginning of this season. So this is really good news. Okay, so movement freedom for recreational beekeepers in the blue zone as of today, the 20th of October. Registered recreational beekeepers in the general blue zone are now able to move honeybees and beehives via a hive movement declaration. Now we'll have a look at that shortly, thanks to the effectiveness of the Varroa mite emergency response plan, containment and eradication so far. Now this isn't also in small part to the president of the Amateur Beekeepers Australia, the ABA, Sheila Stokes, has been lobbying. She's been working at the cold front alongside the DPI throughout this incursion. I talked to Sheila only this weekend past, and I've got to say she's exhausted, but she's putting in great efforts for us amateur beekeepers. All right, back to this. So what does this mean? So this is an amendment to the emergency order, and it brings hive and bee movements for registered recreational beekeepers into line with registered commercial beekeepers in the general blue zones. What do I have to do? Well, no surprise here, it's much the same as for the commercial beekeepers. All registered beekeepers in the blue zone are now permitted to move bees and beehives from interstate and within the blue zone if they have completed certain requirements. This includes TOCAL training course. Now TOCAL is the teaching college of the DPI based at Maitland. Now incidentally, they lost all of their beehives too. I talked about that in the last video. They didn't escape it. They're right smack in the middle of the red zone. So there's an online training course. I've done it. It's not difficult to do, but it provides us Aussie beekeepers with essential information about the Varroa mite and what we have to do with them. So the other thing is alcohol washing. Now it's moved away from sugar shakes. It's a required thing before a move that we do an alcohol wash on at least 300 bees. I'll talk a little bit about that too. Now, what's this other one? Movement declaration application. So that's an online application form for the movement. And then you have to keep records of the movement for 5 years. So even if that colony perishes, you still have to keep the records of that movement for obvious reasons. If there's an outbreak down the track somewhere, they need to be able to backtrack to see where every potential contamination has taken place. The plan has been carefully developed through a risk-based approach to enable greater freedoms in the low-risk areas of New South Wales. Where can I move my bees and hives? Registered beekeepers in the blue zone can move their hives within the same zone. Okay, good. Beekeepers may apply to other states to move bees into their jurisdiction, and if they meet the entry requirements, New South Wales can issue an emergency permit for that movement. It is up to you as the beekeeper to ensure you are complying with another state or territory's rules. This is critical. It's not just New South Wales, we have to follow their rules too. Check with the interstate jurisdiction that you are able to meet their requirements before applying for a movement permit. Now, what is the reality of recreational beekeepers needing to move across the border? Well, people live on the border, so there's places where a town is split in two. They call it two separate towns, like Albury Wodonga. It's two separate towns, but it's almost the one jurisdiction there, but they're in two separate states. So that can be an issue. And hopefully this permit system will enable them to get to their hives or relocate their hives into their own home or just move in between their apiaries. Right, so registered beekeepers may also complete a movement declaration when moving bees from interstate into New South Wales. Now I know Queensland and Victoria up to this point have said no New South Wales bees coming into our state. I don't know what the situation of that is yet. If you need to go into those jurisdictions, well, contact them and see if you can. You might not be able to. Even on the recreational side, recreational beekeepers in Queensland don't want to even come to New South Wales. Crazy, right? But they don't want to come to New South Wales for fear that they might bring home a mite. I'm not going to talk anymore on that. And can I move my queen bees? Now, this is where we're getting more commercial again. As per the emergency order, only registered commercial beekeepers are permitted to move queen cells, queen bees and escort bees. If they completed the Varroa online training within the last 12 months and prior to the movement and completed at least one alcohol wash as described below. Now this is it, 64 hives or less. So if you've got one hive or up to 64, then you've got to do an alcohol wash on all of your hives. And if it's 64 to 640 hives, alcohol wash of 64 hives. And more than 640 hives, alcohol washing of 10% of your hives. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know recreational beekeepers with 640 hives. I'm thinking that's pretty commercial by then. So pretty much the rest of this information is back to the commercial field. That means a registered commercial beekeeper in the blue zone can move a queen to another beekeeper within the blue zone or in the surveillance, the purple zone. So they can go into the purple zone. A registered commercial beekeeper must ensure that any queen bees, escort bees and queen cells are moved in a secure container that prevents them from coming into contact with any other bees and remain in the secure container until they arrive at the premises at which they will be placed into a hive. Just a commercial beekeeper who moves a queen bee with escort bees or queen cells between premises must make a record of the following and retain that record for a period of 5 years. The location where the queen bee was bred, the date on which the movement occurred, the details of the original and destination premises, bee registration number of the receiving beekeeper. This has always been a requirement, but not many people have actually ensured that and recorded that you're supplying a queen or bees to a registered beekeeper. This is something they're cracking down on more now. Let's go back and follow those links to see where they go. So the hive movement declaration. So as you can see, it's just taken us to another page. Movement of hives in the general zone. Little bit of preamble. Who can submit a declaration? Well, now we know that it's not just commercial, but also recreational. And it applies to a person or corporation who has. There we go, commercial, the Tocal College Training Alcohol Wash and Hive Movement Declaration. Now that's where I thought we were going. I'll click on this again. Now that's all saying much the same thing as we've just read. They're talking an exemption of alcohol wash requirements for registered commercial beekeepers that have deployed hives in the almond pollination. There is an exemption to the alcohol washing requirements where miticide strips and sticky mats have been used. This is allowed for in the Biosecurity Emergency Group Permit. Let's talk a little bit about the miticide strips and mat system. It's not a common thing in Australia because we've never had the mite before. And the question has come up on a number of forums, and even members of the ABA have questioned, why are we doing alcohol wash and sugar shakes and to a lesser extent drone uncapping when that only samples a tiny proportion of the colony? And that's true, that's a good argument. And I think it's even Randy Oliver has highlighted the fact that when you have 20, 30, 40,000 bees and you're taking a sample of 300 or 500, when you're using it in a country that is managing Varroa destructor, that's giving you an indication of the level, the mite level in that colony. And typically if you get a 3% hit, so out of 300 bees you get 9 mites, that's an indication of 3%, then it's time to treat. And if it's below that level, then you test again and monitor a little bit further down the track to see what the numbers are like. You don't just treat on and on and on, because it does knock the bees around. In our case, we're not just doing a count to see what level of infestation we have, we want to see if we're infested at all. And 300 bees or 500 bees, even 1,000 bees, that's a small proportion of the overall population, even when you're taking them from the brood frames. It could very easily miss that mite. You might have 3 mites in there. Well, that's enough. That's enough to declare a red zone. And you might have missed it. This goes back to the original testing program that we've all been doing for several years now, mostly with sugar shakes to keep people that don't like killing bees happy. When they discovered the mite, it wasn't through those alcohol washes or sugar shakes or even drone uncapping that thousands of people had done and reported. It was from a sentinel hive, and the sentinel hive program uses miticide strips and sticky mats because that'll collect whatever mites there are there. It'll kill them and they'll fall onto the mat, and then you know. So that's been a question a lot of people have asked. Why are they only testing the sentinel hives every 6 weeks? Well, you're about to find that out. And they've been saying the sentinel hive program can't be working because Varroa was already spread before they discovered it. Well, my argument is it is working because there was a sentinel hive that found it way above all of the manual testing, alcohol washes and the other tests by thousands of beekeepers in the area. So sentinel hives work, but also miticide strip and mat definitely works for detection, to know that you have Varroa in the area. So that's 6 weeks. What's that about? Well, we'll go over and look at this permit. So this is from the Australian government, and the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. They're the people that give the nod whether you can and how you must use any medicine or pesticide in the country. So we're down to permissions here. So this is a permit to allow supply and emergency use of an unregistered AG vet chemical product for surveillance, suppression or control of varroa mites in honeybee colonies at crop pollination. Alright, so this permit has specifically been raised for use in the crop pollination. So that's a permit number. It's been raised very recently. That's who the holder and so on. So this permit is in force from the 22nd of July to the 30th of November. It's a pollination period. And the permit holder is the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, the DPI. The supplier is the DPI. And also Biosecurity Queensland, Agriculture Victoria, and the DPI of South Australia. So it only applies to those states. Persons who can use the product under this permit. Persons generally who have been authorised by the relevant state and territory government departments of agriculture, primary industries or equivalent. Products to be used. Bevarol strips, an unregistered product, as in it's not registered in Australia. Containing 3.6 milligrams per strip of flumethrin as the only active constituent. Restraints for use only by persons who are suitably trained, experienced and qualified in the use of vet chemicals and are competent in the handling and management of honeybees. Directions for use. The situation. Honeybee hives in place for the 2022 pollination season. So this is really restricted. The pest is Varroa mite, Varroa destructor. And the rate. So they're giving what the dosage is. It's a bit like the label on chemicals. It is the law. So critical use comments. The supplier must provide a copy of this permit to apiarists whose hives are treated under this permit prior to or at the time of product application. It gives the directions on how to apply the strips and for how long. Talks about residues in honey and the frequency. Do not apply more frequently than every 6 to 8 weeks. So this is a very specific limitation. Now I know this is just for the pollination, but a similar permit exists for DPI's use throughout the country, or the state equivalent and territory equivalent, for use in the sentinel hives. You can't be more frequent than every 6 to 8 weeks. That's why we have that period of testing between each test. And do not apply more than 9 times per annum. Where possible, rotate the use of Bevarol strips with other products with a different mode of action. Note that products containing taufluorovenate, e.g. Apistan, and Bevarol strips have the same mode of action. So you can't just switch over to Apistan. It's the same product, essentially. So withholding period. Honey, not required when used as directed. Comb honey, do not make comb honey available for human consumption in hives if hives are treated when supers are present. And there's safety. They're talking about elbow length gloves, and this is nasty stuff. You don't want to be getting it on you. And there's records. Export of treated, you're not allowed to export. And then it gets down to essentially the label that comes with the treatment that they bought from overseas. That's all I'm going to go through here. The key thing is this stuff is not available to everyday beekeepers. Even in those commercial pollination colonies, the beekeepers aren't applying this. This is done by the trained DPI people. It's that serious here. Now I know Americans are probably thinking, what's all the fuss about? Well, you guys have been doing it for a long time. This is very precise, and they're being put into hives for days and monitored. So they want to know if there's any mites there. So all those people that have complained about alcohol washers can't possibly tell us, well, the truth is they've been using the strip and mat method throughout the entire period to determine exactly where the outbreaks are. And this is why I'm confident that they do know exactly where it is. It is delimited, as the word they use. And as I said last time, the eradication phase is almost done. They're still doing some eradication. They've started cleaning up the dead hives and wrapped hives. And as I said before, they're on to the baiting program. And you've got to wonder about baiting. They're using fipronil, as I've mentioned before. It's spring here. There's loads of floral sources. Do you think a bee is going to go to a bait station when there's flowers right there? Now, we all know as beekeepers that bees will always prefer nectar over syrup. And I was a little sceptical about how well that's going to work on the feral colonies out there, especially in some of the wild tiger country up there. Now, okay, we don't have tigers in Australia unless they've escaped the circus or the zoo. I'm just using that as a generic term. So there's some pretty inhospitable wild country out there where people just would not be able to get to. We get back to this baiting program, and it's a grid pattern, and they're putting stations I think it's still every 3 kilometres. And I did see the permit that was raised years ago, and that specified every 500 metres. Well, I'm guessing that would be incredibly labour intensive. So they've settled on 3 kilometres. But a part of what they're doing is they're using an attractant. And that attractant is warmed up wax and honey. So that smell, and we all know the bees do like that too, that smell will permeate everywhere within a wide range. So if you've got bait stations every 3 kilometres, that means it only needs to reach at most 1.5 kilometres for that aroma to get out there and attract the bees to it. Now, of course, you're going to have foragers that have their hell bent on a particular floral source. They're not going to drift to the bait station, but you don't need every bee in the colony to find that bait station and take the fipronil back to their colony. You only need some. And they're doing a monitoring program where, as I said before, they have the syrup and this warmed up honey and wax to be the attractant to set that position as a regular feed site, and then they'll switch in the fipronil and monitor, and they will count bees and count the activity, and then they'll come back and they'll take the fipronil out and return the syrup, and then they'll come back day in, day out, monitoring the activity that keeps coming back. Now, when bees are on a good source, they'll find it every day, and they'll still continue to use the warm wax and honey to be the attractant. And they're determining that once the bait station doesn't see any activity, then they've been successful in that baiting process. I sure hope they're right. Okay, back to this page, and I thought this link would have taken me to declaration, but it's a declaration application down here. Well, this one. So we're going to click on that, and it's literally just a form to fill in. You can take your time and save it and pick it up later. So there's a number of steps: the application information, your details, origin details, destination, and the declaration. And if you can't do it all at once, you can save it and pick it up later. I'm not moving anything, but it's a fairly typical form. All your details. And a business if. Have you completed the Tocal Varroa Mite training? Yes. You got no choice there, it has to be. And the date that you're going to be moving it. And if you've got an ABN, or that's an Australian business number or an Australian company number. Now, it probably won't let me go next. Oh, it will. So how many hives are you doing? And the address. When it says drop a pin, it's going to put it on a map. But I'm not actually filling it in, so let's see. Purpose of the movement, so pollination or new floral source. Or as one recreational beekeeper I knew of had sold their house and had bees, but they weren't allowed to move the bees from their house. Now that causes a problem because the new people buying the house can't move the bees either. But they could have. Probably the only option for the buyer could have been to get in a pest controller and wipe them out. So it was stressful, and not as stressful as people in the red zone losing their colonies altogether, but it was one of the hitches that have been finally ironed out now, so you can move your colonies in that situation and any other. So purpose, and then you've got your declaration that you've completed the Tocal training, you've done the alcohol wash on all the colonies that you're moving. Remember those numbers. If it's up to 64 hives, you've got to do a wash on every colony. I have read and agree and meet the conditions of the current emergency order, and I declare the information to be true and correct. Now this declaration's actually pretty serious because of that $1.1 million fine. Or if you're a company, it can be a $2.2 million fine, plus up to 3 years in jail. So that's the big stick. So I'm not going to submit that. I just wanted to go through that process and see how simple it is. It's easy to do. I did that Tocal training course, and I think it took all of 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes if it really took a long time. Now I've done Tocal training for my Certificate 3 and it uses the same platform as that. So I was very used to the platform, so maybe I'll whip through it quicker than someone who's never been on that platform. But even if you're allowed half an hour, that's plenty of time. They've got videos and slides and so on. It's good information. Personally I think every beekeeper should go and do that training course. It's free. And it'll give you a taste of the sort of training that Tocal offers. That's it for this update, this wonderful news that we can all move bees again. And a quick comment on the Senate inquiry held at Newcastle. I really thought that that room would have been packed, given that Newcastle is the red zone. And I was surprised to see that it was only a handful of people. There were calls for people to offer submissions on how they think that the Varroa response has gone, what possibly, suggestions of how it could have done better or how it could still go better. And then the people that made those submissions could also come to the inquiry as a witness. essentially on their submission, but also ready for any questions. I attended in my role in the ABA, but it was mostly the president that did all the talking. Our submission was in joint with ARBIC, the Australian Honeybee Industry Council, and the ABA, Amateur Beekeepers Australia. And we were both pretty much aligned with what would be good. Some of the things that came up were easier registration, and that was misconstrued as by some to mean free, and that wasn't the point we were getting to. The online registration process, particularly for some of our older members, is a little bit hard to follow. I think just a revamp of the web page and make it easy to follow and also easy to log in and update. So that was one of the things. One of the senators asked one of the senior beekeeping representatives there whether he thought that the eradication program will succeed, and unfortunately he doesn't believe it. So as I said before about the feral colonies, if we can't wipe them out and cowboys moving colonies illegally, it's going to be a tough ask. But the response to that from the DPI, and this is not just the people on the ground but the management running the program and the boffins, the scientists, is that they are still at this very point very, very confident that they will succeed, that we will eradicate Varroa. And I'm fingers crossed. I really want that to be the case. That's where I'm going to leave it now. I'm surprised that more people didn't turn up, but it was very informative. It was some of the questions from the senators, I can't think offhand, got me thinking as well. And I don't know what'll come of it. I hope to see something positive come out of it for a better response in the next incursion or outbreak, and hopefully government will do an even better job than they did this time. One thing I will mention, when asked if they could use more resources, the DPI people said no, and that really surprised me. I thought any government department would be open arms to more and more resources to be thrown at a major issue like this. And from my time on the ground in volunteering up there, like, we had 7 teams. Why not have more resources and make it 20 teams? If you can have more people, more resources, then surely the result will be quicker and more effective. But who am I to know that? They're way above my pay grade. So that's it from Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees, where beekeeping is an obsession. Happy beekeeping, everyone.